Welcome to the Pantheon Plus Rewind.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, and welcome to episode 89 of the Pantheon Plus Rewind, the weekly podcast covering Pantheon, Rise of the Fallen, and its community. This week, we're of course going over the recent giant dev stream, getting up to no good with Kilson's community debate, discussing dungeon design, and topping it off with the end of the Age of Chaos. Please, settle in and get comfortable as we pore over some less heavy topics. Don't worry, no network stacking this time. Just the gentle drizzle of me, Desrin, and my torrential co-host, Theric, as we bring you this week's Rewind. All right, so are you seeing where I'm going with this, Theric?
I definitely see where you're going with this. It's funny, we didn't talk about this ahead of time, but I'm like, I guarantee 100% I know what he's going to do for the intro. I know what he wants to talk about. And all these little puns, all these little hints in your intro there, I know where we're going.
Awesome. Well, for the audience, I had the pleasure of introducing my very lore and story focused co-host to one of the best narrative games of all time, in my opinion, Heavy Rain. And
yes.
And so I have to bring it up because I have heard you guys are liking it. So
yeah, so man, it's so cool. Like, first of all, I love that this is like a game that you love so much that you felt strongly enough to tell me like you have to play this. So I take those recommendations very seriously. You know, you're an experienced gamer and your word means a lot to me. So I'm like, okay, good, we'll check it out. And it was one of those games I actually told my wife about, and she loves, like, she's not a gamer, but she loves murder mysteries. She loves, like, you know, sort of these heavy narrative games. And we've actually played some games together where she just watches me play. This sounded like one that would really work. And she read it and she's like, oh my God, we have to play this. I'm like, yes, okay. So we sat down, I fired up the Steam Link, I put it on the TV, we're on the couch, I've got the controller. And this is a game that I hadn't played before. I mean, it's a very much a console, right?
Yeah,
I think it's console originally ported to PC. Yeah, so it missed my, it wasn't on my radar. It wasn't a game that I played back in the day or when it came out. I don't even know how old it is, but
pretty
it's
old.
Great. Yeah, it doesn't feel old though.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the animations have improved. Like, there's better animation technology now, but the things that it does from a technological standpoint and a gameplay standpoint, the innovations that it does are pretty impressive still. We were sitting there playing it, and I'm doing the controls, which is a good thing because I don't think she could do these controls. But I'm like, slowly moving the thumbstick to have my guy open a drawer or something like that. Like, and it's weird in the best kind of way where you just don't really know what's going on. Anyway, I don't want to go on too long. I really enjoyed it though. But very good recommendation.
I'm super, super glad. And it's always, hard to make recommendations because you never quite know like how it's going to resonate. Yeah. But there are a few that I list under that category of like, okay, this is a important title, and so I'm really glad you guys are experiencing that. But
it is an important title. That's a great way of putting it, because it makes me think. I'll just quickly mention the other game we played together was LA Noire, which had some similar sort of like a similar kind of important game in gaming because it did some innovation things with technology and stuff like that. So yeah, those kinds of games are I think everybody should at least try them.
Yeah, totally. And just wait, after you're done, there's actually a documentary about it, all the stuff. But anyway, this is indeed a Pantheon podcast. But, I can't help but call out the great games, when I can. And you know what? We've got some great people to go with our great games in this week's adventuring party. So let me introduce them. We've got Shuriken on the Dwarf Cleric, Ziplocks on the Darkmere Rogue, Jason on the Scar Beardlord, Sparoh on the Elf Ranger, Bounty Code on the Human Wizard, Bitcrunch on the Ashen Elf Shaman, and Screech on the Scar Bard. Thank you, as always, for tossing coins to this podcast. Honestly, I can't wait for our next giveaway. That's what I always see here. But
Yeah, we'll do one pretty soon.
Yes. But yeah, really everything we do is kind of just to bring the best that we can to this community. And it always just feels good for the community to just bring it back around. So you guys are awesome. And if you'd like to join the adventuring party, feel free to throw a donation using the super chat function during our YouTube premiere. Or if you can't make it and would like to support the show on Patreon, we've got one of those too. So either way, we just like being able to do what we do and have y'all listen to us each week. So on that note, let's get right into some VR news and notes.
This week in Visionary Realms news and notes. All right, so the latest Pantheon news this week, we are going to be going over the developer update stream that happened on Thursday this week, which we're going to get into. And it's also been a while since we've checked on Pantheon's official Twitter feed, which I like to do once in a while and we have some fun with. So I think it's high time we did that. So we'll get to that as well. But let's start with the developer update. So this was on February 10th, and it was titled The Galdassi Ruins and Giants. And it featured Ronick and Minus. They took us on a little tour, both a visual and a lore tour, so to speak, of an area of Wild's End known as the Galdassi Ruins. So visually, it was a bit of an update to the gray boxed version of the zone, which we saw a little while ago, actually. More specifically, it was in September of 2021.
Yeah.
The developer stream was called Building Wild's End. And in that one, they showed, all the areas of Wild's End, or not all, but a lot of the areas of Wild's End. And one of those being the Galdassi Ruins.
Yeah.
So that was the previous state. So that's actually 5 months worth of progress. If you think about it, from then till now in February, to go from what we saw then to what we saw this week. And to VR's credit, they actually showed that clip for reference. So now I'm kind of two minds about this, Desert, and I'll ask you to tell me sort of which mind I should listen to here after I give you my initial take. But I did talk about this a little bit on Pantheon Plus U, our after show, where zone design is the most important factor. Designing a play space and that makes gameplay interesting, it makes it challenging and fun. Like, that's paramount, and it takes time. You can't just slap together some, landscape features and call it a day. And you can tell that this is a very, highly designed zone. And it's just more involved than what we may assume. But having said that, 5 months, when I sat back and sort of reflected on this, 5 months to make this kind of progress, seems a little slow, especially after they've repeatedly emphasized, the speed at which their tools can create these areas. That's been a consistent message we've heard, and they've demonstrated that. Yeah. So I'm wondering where you stand on this, because obviously there's still a lot to do with this. I mean, this was the Galdassi Ruins,
right?
Not even the whole zone. They got assets to place, NPCs, mobs, all that kind of stuff. What are your thoughts on that, Des?
Well, I mean, first of all, they're probably not just working on this area. Again, I have to kind of assume that. But yeah, so on one side, they're probably not doing everything just specifically on Galdassi Ruins, I'm sure. And I mean, they even reference this later in the show when they go over the patch notes of they repopulated Thronefast, for example.
That's a good point. I missed that. You're right.
Right. And so, and also previously, the last several streams, they've talked about how, they've really set themselves up so that even when the programmers have other big things to do, the designers have tools and things ready so that they're not just hanging, right? So they can be productive even when the programmers might not be as available. So, but I will admit, when you frame it in that this was 5 months ago, you saw this really white box, and then now we're here today and we're seeing what I would call gray box. It's just a little bit further, and it's a bit more refined, obviously. But yeah, I could see why you have two minds about this, man.
Yeah, it's sort of funny because I didn't feel it when we were watching the stream. I was enjoying it, and I commented many times that I thought, things look really nice and I really liked the design. It's just when you sort of, you don't realize how quickly time goes by is what it ends up being, right? Like I didn't realize September was when that other stream was, and that's already 5 months ago. So it just kind of takes you back a little bit. So that's part of what I thought, and I don't know what we're going to see next, and I don't know when the next HDRP Part 2 stream is coming up. We keep mentioning that.
Yes.
I think that would be pretty helpful right now. I think something like that could go a long way, and just to show us maybe the global development. We're going to get the newsletter next week with the roadmap, which will be helpful. Just a piece that I reflected upon and thought about after the fact. But the big part of the stream was there was a lot of concept art, and it was those giants, as the stream was titled. Ronik read some old and some new lore about them, which is, of course, music to my ears. And they talked about the different types of giants on Terminus, what they look like, and a little history. And it sounds like we're actually going to get the full text of that lore in the newsletter coming up next week. It's actually coming out on February 17th, according to their previous calendar that they released. I think Ronik actually misspoke on the stream last night. He said next month when the newsletter comes out. Just to clarify for everyone, it's not a month, but next week, February 17th. The Galdassi ruins and the Galdassi giants that they talked about were basically just one of these different types of giants, and it was fun because when you watch the stream, you get all the information, but you're not hearing the chat that's going on, and Joppa was in chat, and he was busy. He was a busy boy. Yeah, dropping lots of beans, supplementing some of this information. A couple questions came up that he actually answered it, and I wanted to make sure everybody heard about it. One of the questions was like, are there giants in Fairthale, in that area? And he said, no, not in Fairthale. That honor belongs to the Colossi. However, there are rumors of a giant presence in the Rhone Mountains to the north. So very cool, and it makes me think of that topographical map that they released a little while ago. Yeah. If you look at that and you see that there's actually like a little passage that goes from Fairthale, like a mountain passage up to the Rhones. And the lore talks about the Colossi a little bit. There is reference to them. So it's not a completely new introduction, but it's interesting that, there might be something in Fairthale that, is not exactly a giant, but similar in some ways. So kind of cool.
Yeah, I really like the concept art of the giants, like specifically, and how varied they were, and kind of different. Because I always imagine, because this is what games do all the time, is just like scaled up humans, and they look like oddly shapen, in a lot of ways. Like I kept noticing a lot of the themes of like really big like hips. And I was just like thinking about it, like anatomically speaking, for such a large creature, a lot of like pressure is like put on the hips, and I was just my brain was just like going down all this like this rabbit hole of like how a giant would actually be structured, and the way that Jared talks about it, he's putting so much thought into these things, and I'm like, I wonder if that's like a part of how they go about designing mobs is that deep, and I wouldn't doubt it.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, after last night's stream, if you don't think that that's how deep they're going, then you're not watching closely enough. I really think that his brain is attuned to these kinds of things. The concept art was pretty cool, actually. I mean, some of it I've seen before, and some of it was new. I think the first ones they showed were all new ones. And like you said, the anatomy was pretty interesting. I mean, some of those giants had some pretty big guts on them. I mean, I have to say that. It was almost like, it was almost human-esque in their, that they were human-esque, but not just like you say, elevated humans. They just had some really familiar features, I guess you might say, which was interesting and sort of makes them a little bit more real, I guess.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what your expectations were. We always talk about expectations with these streams, and we keep ours in check for sure. I sure would have loved to have seen a 3D modeled giant. I hope that the reality that we when we do see one lives up to the detail and the mystique that they've ascribed to these creatures, because I mean, I know VR likes to keep their secrets, and I agree with them most of the time. And I feel like, it'll be a cool thing to see when we finally see one, but if they've done some, it would have been a great addition to the stream. I think it would have sort of added another connection to like where they are in development.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you agree with me?
Yeah. And I love that you brought it back around, and it's just like so applicable to last week's talk of like, I would like to see all of these things come to life. And we saw some of the like architecture, but especially being that they're showing all these different types of giants, which makes me assume that we're not going to have just one reskinned giant, model.
Right.
Like
giant number one, and that's all you get with different colors.
Purple giant and green giant.
White for the frost giant.
Yep, exactly. And so that's my expectation now. And we didn't even get one model of a giant. And so it does lead me to kind of be like, all right, well, my expectations are that we will have several different types and shapes of giants. So
yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. The thing about giants is that they have a legacy to live up to, because I know that they don't want to be EverQuest. This is an EverQuest 2.0, like this isn't, or 3 or whatever. But giants in EverQuest were a big deal, right? Everybody knows that. Everybody talks about how the threat they pose, and you could hear them coming a mile away, and just, the role they played in certain quests. Anyway, yes. Giants have there's an expectation from an EverQuest historical standpoint with giants. So I just think that, they're sort of, I hope that they have big shoes to fill. Oh, that's a terrible pun, but I'm going to say it anyway, whatever. It's because it works. So, it'd be pretty cool to see one someday. I hope we do get to see one soon. So, there was more lore actually about the giants that Ronak, beyond the stuff that he read, there's more he said that he didn't have time to read, and he shared it with us on Pantheon Plus U in our chat afterwards, which is super cool of him to do, and I really appreciate that. So you can bet I'm going to use it in an upcoming video. I'm not going to read it here because it was actually pretty extensive. So, but I'm going to make a video about it, so you can stay tuned for that.
Yeah.
But the centerpiece of this stream, like I said, was Jared Pullen's concept art tour and his description of the work. And I won't go into detail because it was an immersive 18 minutes or so, I think, that brought us really into his world, into his mindset and his mood while creating his concept art. We talked a lot about it on the show. But I wanted to focus in on the mood for a second, because this is something that's actually been talked about quite a bit. I've been looking at the comments today on the video and looking at Reddit and seeing what people are saying about the stream, as I always do. The background music during the Jared's piece was super cool. And like I said, Joppa was in chat. That music that we heard, so this is what he says. Fun fact number 1, the musical piece was called The World is Born. It's an unfinished piece that they've not publicly released. So we kind of got a secret music reveal, which I love.
Yeah.
I don't know if you felt the same way, but I heard that music and I'm like, oh, this is
it was super reminiscent of that, the piano piece for I think it first played in that co-stream, when he looks through that space in the wall.
Yes,
and it plays that.
Yes,
and I feel like this is like Joppa's motif now. It's just the really light, like mood-setting piano music. But we'll see how that translates eventually to other pieces. But
yeah, Joppa's motif is a good way of putting it. And then there was, of course, the whispering effect that Jared decided to add on his own, and made it in. And then it's actually, we got a pretty big bean off of that whispering effect in chat from Joppa. So I know some people didn't like it. I loved it. I thought it was hilarious. I have no problem with it whatsoever. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. I'm glad that they let Jared do something like that. It makes VR real to me when they do stuff like that. Anyway, the bean that we got is that Joppa revealed a zone that I don't think they've talked about before. So this is what Joppa said. He said, just wait until we do a zone reveal for the Whispering Lands. There's a reason they say Rothak went mad after venturing there, returning from the Whispering Lands as the Black Moon King. And I asked JN about this in the last roundtable he did. I asked about Rothak and like where he went. So I love that Joppa's like surreptitiously like following up on that question, like 2 months later, to sort of answered in a very coming at it from a different angle. That's amazing. So if you didn't like the whispering, fine, but hey, you know what? It led to a bean being dropped. So
Beans being
it's pretty sweet. Yes. And yes, exactly. Drac and I had this whole thing planned out for Pantheon Plus. We were going to actually emulate it too. We were going to do the whispering thing, and then it sort of fell apart, but whatever.
Well, there was enough whispering, I think, to go around.
Yeah, probably. So like I said, had time to reflect on the stream, and I was thrilled with the lore drops. This is my kind of stream that I could talk about. Like we said, left me a little unsure about the pace of development. What are any thoughts on the dev stream before we move on here, Des?
Yeah. I mean, I think just generally that I feel the same. Like I obviously I love the lore drops. I still enjoy the concept art, even though it has now set my expectations higher, which was kind of my criticism before. But yeah, I think my hope is that, as I kind of like mentioned, that we're only seeing like a tiny bit of the world building that they're currently doing, and the reason that things feel slow is because they're finishing off those not super visible underlying systems, or that like perhaps there's been a lot of class work done in this time. Anything to say that this isn't the only thing they've been working on, and I can really see and really echo a lot of those criticisms of the folks that they saw eventually. In a spoiler alert, they actually run around in the gray box kind of area as like a video, which was a nice progression. Was concept art to stills to video, but seeing a character just kind of like run around in that semi gray box unpopulated area that we saw in an even more unfinished state several months ago, this might be a little not very exciting, or maybe even concerning,
Right.
And I mean, we know the timeline of the project and a lot of the whys for that timeline, but it still boils down to 8-ish years to see someone running around in a gray box area, at least when you scrape it at surface level, right? And we're kind of at the point where they've talked it up enough that like this year has to deliver more like concrete signs of swift progress. And I think fans and critics alike are feeling that.
I would agree.
Yeah,
I would agree.
It was a good stream though. And I still enjoyed it, but I can't help but feel like if they keep like pulling this card, this like really early progress card of content, like I think even the fans are going to start to get uneasy, because we need to see some like near finished content soon, or these in progress little sneak peeks are going to get a little old, I think. So
I'd like to go back to Fairthale at some point. Like, show us, let's do some mechanics. Let's see some other game development avenues or areas in Fairthale, because that's the completed. It's probably the most completed zone of the game or area of the game.
Right. Some bit of group play in Fairthale, or something that they have a little bit further along, just to show that, hey, this game isn't gray box.
Right, because it's like you say, for us, we know what they're doing, we know what's going on in the background, but not everybody knows that, and they can't. I know that they say it a lot, but they have to mention it every stream. They really do. They have to say, look, we know, this may not be the biggest thing, but we want you to know we're also working on this. They did it a little bit with the patch notes.
Yes.
But it should be always prefaced with that.
Totally. And so what I kind of keep coming back to is this. I think these streams are still for like us, the longtime backers and people that know the timeline and know the whys, and that the whole like ramp up of Pantheon gaining exposure and reaching more of the masses as they've indicated they're heading towards. That's just not happened yet. We're still in the pre that. At least I hope that's what's going on. But the fact is we aren't the only ones watching. So Yeah.
I agree with you. Yeah, I think we're on the same page about this. I just it's hard for me to be objective because I like these kinds of streams, these lore stuff. But I also know from a greater perspective, it's not everyone's thing, and you're going to get this kind of bounce back when you show concept art that is it's whether it's new or whether it's old, it's still concept art, and we need to be when you use the word imminent to describe what 2022 is going to be, we need to be looking at a little bit from more of a three-dimensional view of things. So just some feedback, I think we have to keep our thoughts on this as objective as possible and as balanced as possible. We don't want to, we always want the best we want this game to be the best it can. So I appreciate your take on that.
Awesome.
Right on. So let's talk Twitter now, because Twitter was fun. They had a good question up. And we won't, linger on this too long, but this is funny. The community debate, this is from early last week, I think. The question was, if you had the ability to pick one GM power to secretly add to your character's abilities for 1 week before being found out, what would you choose and why? So if you're here for the premiere, let us know in chat. What do you think? What would you choose? Or leave a comment on the video with your answer to this, because there were quite a few on Twitter, but I think I didn't think everything was covered. I thought there were some that were not mentioned. So there's room to expand on this. So Desmond, start thinking about your answer too, because I'm going to ask you after we read some of these Twitter responses. I want to know what you think. Bonus points if you don't use any of the ones we're about to hear, because the Twitterverse did have some good ones. First up is Zach Hansen, also known as Quest on Twitter. He's actually also contributed to the show with his fan art, which you'll see in the section a bit later on. So Zach's answer to this was, I would freeze all the ninja looters experience gain for a week. Take that, thieves.
Brutal.
Love it. Love it. Love it, man. If you had the power to freeze somebody, like what if somebody ninja looted something, was like, yes, and got away, and then they kept playing for like a week and their experience wasn't moving, and they're like, what is going on here? Why is this happening? No. Was it worth it? Was that item worth losing a week's worth of experience? So good. That's Zach we're sharing a brain.
Strong arm, Zach.
Yes. Quest fulfilled. The next one's from Brian, and they said, being able to alter my character's model and size. So that would be pretty cool. I mean, that opens up a lot of like options, like not only your model, but your size. It would be one thing if you could just like expand yourself or shrink yourself down, but also changing your model would be kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah.
And there's kind of a theme of that running through here. We'll see. Okay, so the next one's from Nocturnal Demise, and they said, I'd have so much fun with monster spawning. And would this not be the funnest thing ever? If you had, like, if you could sort of invis yourself, invis separate thing, but like just watch a camp and watch people sitting around a camp pulling mobs, and then you could control like the spawn rate separately. Like, oh, you could screw with people so much. It would be so fun.
Yeah.
So I really liked that one. The next one's from Jeremy Wilson, also known as Man of Rohan, our friend and party member. He said, to impersonate a god, boss, unique creature, emote and converse with that being, even run a unique event and quest with a unique reward. And then Theldrin had the same idea, because I wanted to include his because that was the same. He said, I wouldn't mind being able to turn myself into a mob or a boss in the game and run an unscripted event that randomly happens on the server, where the community and players would interact and possibly get a little memento or an item, something to remember as a GM event. Yeah. So good old memories of GM events, right? Like everybody loved GM events. They were always fun, and we've talked about them a little bit on the show, and we hope VR does them. We want GM events. We like GM events, but to be able to sort of slip into that, persona would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
The next one is from That B Guy, and they had one that actually Basgrim responded to. They said EQ had a monster player character on its test server for a while, and I had so much fun playing there. I think it had a level limit of about 20, and you used to be able to walk around helping low-level characters. And Basgrim reminded everybody that, that was called Project M. So I'm not familiar with Project M. Do you know about this? Is this...
I feel like I've actually heard about this, but it's been too long for me to say anything.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's cool, though.
So right. So as usual, Basgrim knows everything, and he's got the memory banks to help us all out. But anyway, so that would be pretty cool. I mean, being able to just play as a mob, right, where you could jump in and be a snake, snake that kicks people all over the place would be pretty sweet. Our friend Ang said transform players into different models. It was always a blast to see GMs and guys do that back in the day in EverQuest. Yes.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I have like one of my favorite like GM memories was back in the Vanguard beta. There's a GM that I not only remember her GM name, but also her like real life name. Because she was like really good about email correspondence because, you actually did that back in the day.
Yeah.
But it was GM KeyJ, and her thing was turning people into chickens. That was just so you'd be going around and suddenly you'd be a chicken and you would know who struck. And it was just such a fun, silly little thing. And I'm pretty sure, like most of the GMs, they got an island named after them. So I always wanted my house to be on KeyJ Isle because it was just too fun. Too fun.
That's awesome. That's such good memories, and it's so different from how we play MMOs these days, right? Like think about like if if you're competitive, if you're a high level competitive player and you get randomly turned into a chicken, it would just blow your mind. You would be taken completely out of your whole mindset because we just don't do stuff like this anymore, and it's a blast and it makes memories. So That's a great bring up. The next one's from Morgan Hanam, and they said the ability to create spells, see what they come up with.
Ooh.
So that's like RPing. That's like heavy RP of a wizard, druid, sort of, I don't know, magician sort of idea. And being able to come up with your own spells is pretty sweet. That would be a good one. And then the last one is the one that everybody expects. Comes from Captain Skeleton, which makes a lot of sense when you think about this. And theirs was /kill. Just borrowing the GM command, the death note for 1 week. It's like, oh, yes. Just walking around and death touching people. And, I'm not like an evil person, but I got to tell you, that sounds kind of attractive. So
throw the balance off of the world a little bit there. But I think a lot of people in the Twitter comments had something around the way of I'll just clear out the dungeon so that my group can go in.
Right, yeah,
like that kind of a thing.
Done with purpose, right? Done with purpose.
Yeah.
So I've given you a chance to think about it. What's your choice if you could have one power for a week?
I mean, I can't be super unique here, but I would say I would love to pose as an NPC. And just go to like random points of interest and like dungeons and stuff. And I would only respond in like /say chat, and I would only respond if like players tried to interact with me like an NPC. Like I remember back to, in like EQ where you say certain things and, the text chat knows to pick out certain like keywords,
Right. Yep.
And I would just do that and just kind of roll with whatever like the player was inputting, so that I would kind of create whatever quest was, on their mind or what they thought it was, and if I could have maybe a stretch of that ability, or ones that others have mentioned, like if I could use the spawn command for creatures, or maybe like port them somewhere deeper in the dungeon or things like that, just to go along with that pretending to be an NPC that they'll never see again in that place. That incognito, that's totally like what I would want to do.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's definitely a good one. For me, it's like, invisibility is a pretty seems like a pretty mundane power to have, but I don't know if you remember, but EverQuest, after a while, somebody released like an offline version of EverQuest where there was just the world, there was no mobs or population, and you could actually just go wherever, right? Like there was no threats.
Oh yeah.
And I remember going down into the depths of, I want to say, what dungeon was it? I want to say Ryecon, maybe. Might have been Nehania. I don't remember. But one of them that was really dangerous, and I never actually saw the entirety of the bottom of the dungeon. And I was like, oh, I get to go down and see what it looks like now, right? So just to be able to do something like that would be super cool. I mean, it would be a little spoilery, but so be it, right? So,
Right.
I'll take it. So anyway, that's the Twitter question for this week. Thanks to for all you folks who responded to VR's Twitter question. It's always fun to go over those. And that's the VR news. And then in terms of notes, just a quick schedule for us for Pantheon Plus this week. Coming up on Monday, this is February 14th through to February 20th. On Monday, Drac is playing Lost Ark all day, so new MMO. And I believe CryptFox may be joining him for that. Mm-hmm. So tune in. It might be a all-day kind of stream with a couple of our streamer friends. And of course, Drac will be doing EverQuest again later at midnight that day, so busy day for him. We're doing Classes 101 on Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern, as we always are, finishing our last session with Final Fantasy XIV, and hopefully giving out some grades and telling people all about that. Wednesday, I'll have my next lore exploring video up on the Waylanders. That'll be on YouTube at 9 a.m. And Sparoh's streaming that evening at 9 p.m., doing Elder Scrolls Online still. And then that's it for Pantheon Plus for this week. I'm sure that there will be some other stuff. We just didn't get it all sorted out in time for the recording tonight, but that's okay. So check that stuff out, and that is it for this week's VR News and Notes. When the Pantheon community speaks, we listen. So let's dig into the forums and fan projects to see what the discussion's all about.
All right, folks, get your drinks ready, because I think I'll be using the V word a lot here this week. This week's community discussion is rather dear to my heart, and I'll admit it's a bit of a necro thread, so don't fault me for that, but this one is on dungeon design. And it comes from the thread Dungeon Design Required Encounters by Sebkoril on the official forums. Now, the main premise of this thread comes from the idea that dungeons can vary between having linear progression with like required encounters, keying, that kind of stuff, to completely non-linear dungeons where nothing is required and you can just kind of go from place to place however you'd like. So this one really resonated with me because as a little side hobby, and it's funny you mentioned this about like EverQuest offline, being able to go around. Right. But what I've been kind of doing as a little side hobby has been going through the Vanguard emulator and running through each dungeon and kind of cataloging my findings, like a little bit just to document the current status of the emulator and, check off certain dungeons that are more done than others and stuff like that. But also just because, as many of you guys know, Vanguard was a seamless open world with no instances, and Pantheon, while not being entirely seamless, has open world dungeons as well. So this conversation comes up pretty often about like the challenges of building dungeons for non-instanced games where groups are contesting each other for content in the same space. So this little like kind of side project has been really fun, seeing how these dungeons were designed and getting to think back and reminisce a little bit about, the dungeons that I had experienced and how it all kind of like worked together in spite of being open world. In that same way of like kind of going around and like seeing all the things that you hadn't seen, I get to do the same thing. Even though I played so much Vanguard, there's just so much in that game. I'm still finding stuff that I'm like, I didn't know that was there.
And you're doing it through the lens of like analyzing the design, right? Like, so like, how did this work from a design standpoint? Did it funnel players to a certain area? Did it restrict them in an organic way? Was there a barrier here? Like, really, really interesting stuff. A really interesting way of like experiencing the content.
Yeah, and there's so many like varying examples to pull from as well that are just super fun. And I won't go into like detail of like each one, of course, but I think it's just a really good case study for this topic. And so, but yeah, anyway, let's get into some responses. So we've got Sussurus saying it shouldn't be 100% one way, that like a little bit of everything is good, but they lean towards not having anything required and to let the difficulty of the dungeon dictate how you progress. And that keys and content barriers should at most be like a rare way to progress. So very much for the you kind of just go where you want. I did like
where you're able,
where your
ability and your equipment and your skill and all those things, what you've learned up to that point, allow you to go.
Exactly. So kind of a natural gating based on how difficult stuff is. And I loved that was pointed out, because that is, in a way, a content barrier. It's just more of a organic, natural, intuitive one, like, oh, that's a red mob. I cannot go to that part of the dungeon yet.
Right. And it seems like the most obvious way, right? It seems like the most obvious way. It's just that, what's become the norm is something that's been an evolution from a remedy to other problems. But this is really the most common sense way of putting up barriers.
Yeah, and it's funny because thinking about this topic and thinking about like modern games, like going through dungeons is generally, what's the level variance of like going through a dungeon in a modern game? Maybe like a couple levels, because you're not meant to spend time in it. You're meant to get through it, right?
Yeah, that's the big problem. You're not meant to spend time in them, which, think about
so
that.
Funny,
think about what
right?
You're saying there. You're not meant to spend a lot of time here. What the heck are we doing? What are we doing? It's nonsense.
Yeah, but this is a different approach. Open world dungeons and the type of game Pantheon is. There has to be something in the thought out design that makes people spend time there. And again, I love this discussion because we're kind of seeing how we can evolve that time that people spend in the open world dungeon. So we've also got Jintoki 88 popping in to say having to kill a boss in like the basement to get a key to fight a boss in the tower isn't so bad. But if it kind of turns into that linear, okay, we kill A, then we kill B, and then we kill C, like, kind of progression, it effectively just turns the dungeon into a big hallway, and so like, that's not really good either. Which I kind of agree. I mean, I'm not against keying, I don't think, but if you put it in a way where it's like you have to go in this exact order, I could see it making the dungeon feel a little bit less free roam, which I think we want, right?
Yeah, I can see the point there. I think that I don't think it should be like designed that way. I mean, sometimes that's just going to evolve some ways for some dungeons, right? There's always going to be we should do this first and then we should do this. But do we have to? Does the boss A drop a key that leads to boss B that drops a key that leads to boss C? No, that's not great. That's not great.
Seems lazy, right? Like,
it seems lazy, and it also creates this, it creates a sense of once you've completed, connected the dots, you're done.
Right. Because if you had to start all that over again just to do the exact same progression, it's not exactly appealing.
No, right, exactly. So can we go straight to C? If I have a keeper in my group, can I go straight to C? Create alternatives, right? What if you had something like this? Again, I'm going back to something I said before, but like, you can create these alternate approaches, alternate vectors of attack that lead to get us out of this hallway and this linear thinking.
I let me bring up a little example that I was just like brainstorming, not to detract from the actual responses, but like what this made me think of, in addition to the other responses we'll get to, is like how keys don't have to be like super linear. Like, you don't have to do that A, B, C kind of progression. And so the example in my head kind of goes like this, and I think this could just be applied to so many things, because, like I said, I'm not against keying, but I'm against it done in the way that was described above. So what I'm thinking is, like, let's say you are going through the dungeon naturally, and you get to like a library, and you get a book in the library that indicates several components and maybe a symbol or something like that. And those components you can get throughout the rest of the dungeon. Like maybe you get a tooth from a warg boss, or a vial of blood that you find in a hidden lab in the dungeon, or sand from a special hourglass, maybe found in the chest of belongings in like the bedchamber behind the spawn of a mage boss. And like all these things that you don't have to get in order. And they're not even all from killing. Like that's, I think, a main key for me, is that I don't want to have to kill a boss for everything. It's a player versus environment, not player versus, mob. I really want them to push into the environment side. And so how I kind of see this coming together is like, maybe you've gone to this dungeon several times, or, you've maybe grouped with a pug that has one of these components already, or, any number of ways that you can collect these components in the fashion that you'd like. And then maybe near the entrance or something that you've seen a lot, you recognize the symbol from that book. And when you go to that circle with all those components, it like teleports your group to some special, boss area or hidden treasure vault, that was referenced in the book that kind of started this whole like organic adventure. Like that is keying in a kind of non-linear way that I feel is so much more flexible than the ABC. And that would be exciting for me, because it would give me a reason to come back after I've killed, this one boss and gotten some component, or maybe I give it to someone else like at the entrance, that kind of a thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I agree. And this harkens back to what I said at the very beginning of the show, is that design like that takes time and effort. It takes a lot of time and effort, right? This is why we see these ABC dungeons, because they're easy and cheap and easy. And, design, effort gets put into other things. It gets put into a flashy stage to have it happen on, right? So what you're talking about is not in vogue right now. Should be, but it's not.
Yeah. Well, here, Sagrada brings up kind of a point that might resonate with you, and maybe give a varying opinion here. So, Sagrada agrees that dungeons should have like many options of like where you can go. It's worth noting that sometimes having an order to things can help tell a story. And if there's no order at all, it can make dungeons feel that like kind of samey, where you just kind of just randomly go, you just randomly like kill bosses, and there's like no reason or meaning, behind it. So it's like the order of things can sometimes force you to understand like what's going on. And so I kind of get that. I think if it was literally just like a completely open dungeon and you just kind of just randomly like kill bosses, it would get old, man. It would get really old. There's got to be some.
I'm gonna surprise you a little bit and say that I actually don't agree with that. It takes me back. There was a stream where Joppa, the co-stream where Joppa, somebody in chat said, why are you in this dungeon? And Joppa's like, and Co asked the question of Joppa, like,
I remember.
What's the story here? And Joppa's like, you're here because of your own story. You're here because you want loot, or because you're interested in what's down there. Like this linear story, and I don't think it detracts from the lore or the story building when it's not done in a linear fashion. If I want to know like what Hyoket, the backstory to her is and why I'm there to kill her, I've done that at some point. I've explored the library part of Devair, right, on my own time, and done it, or in that group or whatever. It doesn't have to move from point A to B to C to make sense from a story perspective. So I'm a little bit, I'm gonna disagree with that, actually.
Okay. Interesting. I definitely can see the appeal in being able to just do, rather than like, I get it. You don't want to be forced if you're not interested. Not to mention, I think, as we were kind of talking about at the start of like, man, if you have to do stuff in a long particular order, it actually feels worse to repeat it.
Right.
And so,
right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe you can do it over the course of 2 months because you just randomly get groups to go to different areas of the dungeon. One week you're in the library area camping a spawn. Next week you're in the tower where there's another piece of the story that you need, or not need, but forms the story in its entirety. That's how I want to do it. Like, that's my vision of dungeon design integrating with story and lore.
Yes, I actually, it brings up an analogy that I can't remember where I heard this, but it's the difference between reading a book cover to cover versus putting a puzzle together and finally starting to see the picture as you add more pieces.
100%.
So
exact. Good analogy.
I definitely lean towards the latter. I will say that.
Yeah. I've been solving puzzles in computer games since 1994, man. Like, this is what it's going to be, right? Like, this is how my brain works. Linear stories. I'm going to say Final Fantasy XIV is the most linear game I've ever played. It is so on the rails, straightforward story. And I get it. Some people like that. It's not for me.
Yeah. I mean, but for a role-playing game where you are your character in a world and making your own story, it actually doesn't make as much sense to force people down a particular path, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Perfect.
Well, let's see. We'll get one more response here from Squirrely Pete. Bringing up something that I know VR has touched on in the past, which is the idea that dungeons might actually serve really wide varieties of player levels. So if there's a dungeon that has both level 20 and level 50 content, there can be a type of keying that is a little more than just the levels being different. And that is stuff like acclimation or climbing, and all the other things that VR has integrated into the game to make it an adventure, but also a certain amount of progression. I think of that wall that they couldn't quite climb in Fortress d'Air. It's like there's obviously something up there, and it's not your level that's holding you back. It's something else,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, different aspects of your character that aren't as developed. Like, it's hard to talk about this and not talk about some of our PA experiences.
Yeah, I know.
Because it's so relevant. It's so relevant. And, you've seen us play d'Air, they've showed Halner Cave a bunch. All this is present. All these different types of barriers, obstacles, whatever you want to call them, based on different aspects of your character, your abilities, they're all there.
Yeah.
So,
but again, yeah, it's all it's not really the same kind of linear as forcing you to go down a path. It's really just more options. But I still feel like it is keying to some extent because you have to meet a certain requirement. But definitely preferring this approach for my group-based exploration, adventure, RPG, MMO,
absolutely, yeah,
absolutely.
Sure. This is what Pantheon's about for me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm even more excited about this now. Like talking about
Good.
it. Right?
I know, right? Me too.
But yeah,
I want to play now.
I think overall, the theme here is that VR should mix it up as much as possible, and they do, but just that this should be a real focus because, if it's always kill boss A, kill boss B, then boss C, it turns these open world dungeons into more like instances, but with like the annoyance of others,
Yeah, seriously.
But like with, some creativity, like they can create some really like some continuity, I would say. But with progression and making sure it's not just randomly killing bosses, but that it is free flowing like that. Like they can have both that progression feeling of I'm going deeper into the dungeon. I got farther than I got last time, or I've gone to a new place, and like maintain the benefits of a true open world without kind of sacrificing that I don't know, continuity, I guess.
Yeah, well said. That's you got it spot on right there.
Awesome. Well, great little talk. Again, necroed the thread, but feel free to go check it out on the official forums and add your own input. I'm sure the more ideas, the better. So get that going again. And that is going to be it for this week's community discussion. The Pantheon community is full of cool projects, new people, and things that are just worth sharing. What's this over here? Look at that. So let's see what we can find in this week's Community Spotlight. All right, and this week we've got 2 introductions from the official forums to shout out. We've got Ryecon and Docken. So it looks like Ryecon pledged recently after following for about 6 months. So it's awesome to see newer folks, honestly. And I'm pretty sure Docken has been around for a good while. But I have noticed recently he's been more active on the forums, and he's also a content creator. So just want to extend a welcome to both of y'all. Welcome
Ryecon, welcome Docken. I watched Docken's video a couple days ago. It's really good, really good. Everybody should check it out.
Yep, absolutely. I'll shout it out again later as we're going through that too. But yeah, of course, you guys have been really great about jumping onto these threads and saying hi. And so I'll say it every time, but if you haven't done it before, it takes a few seconds, and you never know, you might make a friend, honestly.
Yeah, never know.
Now, in the fan fiction corner, we've got another entry to Benonai's series, Amensol's Focus, and this one is The Blast of War, Part 9. And it comes with Benonai's signature screenshot art technique to spice up the story with some visuals. And it looks really cool, really cool.
It does. I got to catch up on this story. I've fallen behind because I just haven't been had the time to do it, but I got to catch up. But yeah, he's a great writer, great stories.
Oh yeah. And let's get to the video content. So Pantheon related video content. We've of course got Sparoh with an awesome video summarizing and recapping the smart leashing mechanic that we're hopefully going to be seeing in Pantheon pretty soon in action. Again, really great summary. Sparoh's really killing it with the scripting, really great.
She's on point. Yeah, current topic and something that people are really interested in knowing about, the smart leashing stuff that they've talked about. And so I've watched that one as well. It's very good.
Yep. And we've also got CorryDGaming is back and gone through a few more of the Pantheon classes, including the Druid, the Enchanter, the Monk, and the Paladin. So again, it's kind of conversational, kind of hanging out with a friend video. So if you like that, go check out CorryDGaming. And lastly, as you mentioned, we've got Docken. And Docken's a content creator for kind of all sorts of stuff, WoW and other stuff. But recently dropped a video about Pantheon, just kind of gushing a little bit, giving his take on why Pantheon is so important. And so again, definitely go check it out. And I think that about wraps it up. As usual, if I miss something, let me know. And I'm happy to shout out any, Pantheon content creators or community members. So make sure to check the links that I'm going to handily put in the description. And you can jump straight to anything that we've mentioned. And that's going to be it for this week's Community Spotlight.
Sit back and relax. It's time for The Lore You Know. Okay, the Age of Chaos comes to an end this week. In what is one of my personal favorite pieces of lore, a scene that I hold near and dear to my heart, we're going to hear about how the races of Terminus, with the aid of the sons of Terminus, turned the tides of war back against the ravaging lord and his armies, culminating in a final scene which should burn into your memory for years, to come to signify not only an end, but also a beginning, at least in my interpretation. So sit back as I give voice to the wonderful writing of Pantheon's lead writer, Mr. J.N. Gerhardt, as we let the lore you know soothe your soul. Yet the sons of Janavi's vision would rise, and with them came the morning which broke the Revenant into utter chaos. These 6 sons of Terminus were warriors of godlike power in physical might and arcane discipline, one from each pantheon of the sacred. More commonly called war wizards, they are most easily described as high mortal beings of nearly pure supernatural ability. I confess their existence is contested by some today, so strange is their origin and decisive was their merit. With no warning of any kind, the dual terrors set upon the revenant high mortals with furious precision. Haethys Krebgel fled before her assailants, and is since so rarely seen she is thought perished. True to his namesake, Osari raged in ferocity and managed to wound one of the war wizards. But his might could not overcome the relentless heroes, and he fell dead on the very earth he had wiped Havensong from, as if he had merely prepared his own grave. The Ravaging Lord himself was not easily countered. In a turn that should have given the Six great pause, he chose not to face the war wizards, smiting loose his grip on Rainfall. While his twin armies on Kingsreach and Whitethaw were reeling, he withdrew to the volcanic Mount Cadrahor in the north. Now utterly leaderless, the Revenant and their allies were chased off each continent, save for the Lord and his army teeming in the Volcano Foundry. In these conflicts, Avendir, the young heir to Amensol's throne, showed himself a leader of battlefront fearlessness. In 485, he and Causus led the armies of the Six, and with the 6 sons of Terminus, they marched on Cadrahor as one host, intent on extinguishing the Black Flame forever. Yet, even in this short time, the Ravaging Lord had grown in power and depravity. Too slowly it was understood that he cared not who survived, setting loose rivers of molten ore across the jagged terrain of Cadrahor once the armies had entered it. The forces of the Six were divided and trapped, easily ensnared by the expectant Revenant. Yet, with their supernatural fervency, 2 of the war wizards moved directly to the Ravaging Lord, knowing his death would avail all threats. But after a furious melee, one lay dead, while the second was in desperate peril. Yet, these were not all the mighty warriors to arrive on that day of days. Suddenly, the earth shook, and one side of the volcano burst forth in thunder and spray. Out from the rupture flew Ryecon, the rainborn dragon whose dominion was over this very continent. Setting herself between the Ravaging Lord and the sun, she clutched the pillar Ka that towered in the middle of the battlefield and roared a declaration. These pillars are believed to be a signifier of rain-born authority on each continent, for there is one on each major realm. Ryecon blew thick flames over the 2 armies, without regard for division. Her fury was awesome, yet before she could face either warrior, the Ravaging King made his final move. With each malevolent fiber of strength, he impaled the head of the beast upon the pillar Ka, even as she loosed billows of fire. This moment was only surpassed by the next, to which I relent my narration in favor of an actual witness, the human signal bearer, Marthos Bosomir. After this, an even more deafening roar erupted, shaking the foundations of the planet and silencing the entire war on all its lingering fronts. In this quiet, only the immeasurable wings of yet one more beast were heard as they dipped below the clouds that hazed over the battlefield miles above us. This was the Dragon King, Rochnil Thamos. In a flash, his monstrous head pierced the clouds of storm and ash. He crushed the Ravaging Lord in his mouth, but gently enough to flip his pierced body into the air, incinerating it with a blast of molten flame. Rochnil Thamos lifted his wings but once, and the entire veil of cloud dispersed. His size was peerless, yet his form and color were majestic beyond compare. I knew him to be the king of beasts, but there I saw it. His claws dug into the peaks of the mountain range, and it dawned with clarity that he was about to act further. Even as our armies attempted to flee, the Dragon King drew in a massive breath to scorch all he surveyed in flame. Yet, there was a crack and a roll of thunder across the sky. A small glint catches in the pool of Rochnil Thomas's eye, and the colossal dragon hesitates. Faster than his lid can blink, a creature like no other I had seen, though small in comparison, with one hand closed over the mouth of the Dragon King. There was a howling from one corner of the battlefield, but I could not tear my eye away from the sight above. Hovering thousands of feet in the air, it speaks.
Blood for blood, King. There is no breach.
The Dragon King's growl reverberated as he replied in kind.
Blood for grace, emissary. Yet, in the future, there will be red blood.
Drawing the clouds over his ascent, Rocknelthama soared into the skies, cast one shadow over all the scattered armies, and forever disappeared. The creature that stopped his anger and saved us all was never seen again. Such was the end of the Deicide War. And that is the lore you know. And that brings us to the end of episode number 89. Desrin, my friend, as always, thank you for keeping our show on point. And I look forward to checking in with you again next week.
As always, as always.
Right on. And thanks everyone else for hanging out with us. It's always a pleasure. Remember, check the links. They're in the show notes or the video description. And if you want to support the show, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, leave a review on your podcast provider, wherever you get your podcasts. And we appreciate every single one of you who join us every week. So have a good one, and we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Pantheon Plus Rewind. Pantheon Plus is not affiliated with Visionary Realms. Be sure to check out our Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube channels under the name Pantheon Plus. You can follow Theric at Pantheon Theric on Twitter, and Desrin at DesrinDoes also on Twitter. And you can stay up to date with all things Pantheon at www.pantheon.plus. Until next time, cheers, and thanks for listening.